I wanted to basically, just recreate something that was kind of like the men's clubs, but in a way that was easy to access and is built around putting people together naturally.
Welcome to the Masking Tapes. I'm your host, Carolina Hidalgo-McCabe, and I'm so excited today because I'm going to be joined by Alex Vans, who is the creator of Choros, an app that is helping men build friendships, connection, and community, and it's based right now in the DMV. And so, Alex, welcome to the Masking Tapes. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you started?
I appreciate you having me, and really excited to be here, really excited to be talking about hopefully not just Choros, but all sorts of different stuff too. I started it because I was seeing a proliferation of tools out there to combat everyone's desire for community, and how I think the digital world has been very effective as pulling us apart and isolating us. But I didn't see any tools that were meeting men where they were at in terms of how they actually are comfortable forming new social bonds and sustaining those social bonds. I saw a lot of apps that were doing one end of the spectrum, which was like highly intimate, self-disclosure type relationship building, aka swiping apps, right? And then I saw a lot of heavy kind of networking, big event meetup apps. I didn't see anything that was really meeting guys where they're at and putting them into groups where they would have some kind of natural affinity and giving them sort of a digital third place, if you will, some kind of a club where they could feel like they could always tap into. So I've been doing this for, going on 12 months. We've done over 250 meetups since then, so roughly 5 a week. I've met hundreds of really cool guys and built a lot of my own friendships since then. I think, there's like 6 of these guys now that are coming to my wedding in a few months.
No
and
way.
so it's been like really personally fulfilling, as well as just a really fulfilling professional ambition of mine as well.
Before I get into everything I want to get into around your app and the impact that it's had, I would love to backtrack and start with the question that I start every podcast with, which is, what is one of the most challenging things, Alex, about being a man right now?
Thanks for asking. And I don't think I've ever been asked this before. I think the answer is pretty simple for me. You can not even realize it, but as a man, you can go months, if not maybe years, without anybody asking how you're doing, not just, oh, how you doing? Oh, good,
Yeah.
And I think that's just kind of built into sometimes how, as guys, I think we make friends, institutionally within like the institution we're part of, situationally, over a shared activity. And I think the friendship and the bond is there, but we rarely think to just check in. We're also, I think, wired and conditioned in some ways to kind of just say like, I shouldn't complain. I don't want to. No one's asking, so, and I'm certainly not going to volunteer because that's going to be viewed as complaining.
Yeah.
So
I've heard that from many of my guy friends or family members in my life, of like that simple question of like, no, man, like, how are you really doing?
Yeah.
And not just give that like, oh, I'm fine answer, but like, and then being willing to receive when someone's not fine and be able to support them in that way, which I think is so tough.
I remember I was checking in with one of the early Choros users on an app update thing because I just wanted to get his feedback on it. And we're on the phone and there's a little lull and he's like, oh, anyway, man, how you doing? And, my natural response was to be, oh, yeah, really good. I think the V2 of the beta is coming out like in 2 weeks and then we'll have a mobile app. And he's like, no, man, like, how are you doing? And it's like, wow, okay. Yeah, I'm a little stressed out actually. And it was really refreshing. And then it really opened up a lot between us. I found out that he had been previously married. I found out, I learned a little bit about his family, and sometimes guys just don't talk about that stuff. And it just takes that little question sometimes just to break a lot of those walls down.
Yeah. And I think there's a difference between the question, how are you doing? And what are you doing? Because oftentimes we respond to how are you doing with what we are doing and not how we're actually feeling.
Yeah.
Like, how are you feeling? I think is probably what we're actually trying to get at when we ask the question, how are you doing? And I think it's like you lose so much when we're not asking each other that question because we're being shown on social media and whatever it may be, like everyone's doing great. And then internally in between our relationships, we know that's not the truth, and within ourselves. So like, how do we actually get to that? And then where does that lead to friendships?
Exactly.
How do you see that showing up? So you started the Choros app about 12 months ago, correct?
11 months
11
and change.
months.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully by the time this episode comes out, it'll be 12 months. But what were you seeing around you specifically that made you start this app, and why you at this moment too?
A little bit of it was I just had felt my own sort of personal inability to make guy friends as an adult. When I moved, I'm originally from Northern Virginia, but I moved around to a couple different cities. And previously I had moved to New York, and most of the friends that I ended up building were women. And maybe it's just because it's a more acceptable social dynamic to like for a man and a woman to just come together at a bar and get to know each other and stuff than it is just like two random guys. So, I kind of just felt that, I've got old high school friends, and I really want to develop, something that where guys can get together and hang out. And, I sort of thought about some of the things that like used to exist that, my grandfather had access to, and my parents like were, they're super close to work friends that had, been around their lives for decades. And millennials, Gen Z, I don't think we really have that. And so, I wanted to basically just recreate something that was kind of like the men's clubs, but in a way that was easy to access and is built around putting people together naturally.
Yeah. And we think like union halls used to be a place where those kinds of friendships could form, or like people stayed at their jobs longer. So if you're staying somewhere for 30 years, you're likely to form those deeper friendships. And all of a sudden we have that commitment to institution is way more rupture today than it was before. And so we're thinking like, how do you actually build these friendships when you're moving a lot, when you're relocating jobs, like whatever it may be. And so then what was that like starting? How do you start an app to help guys build friendships?
Yeah. I mean, I just brute forced my way through it, basically. So this goes back to, I have an ex co-founder who's like a silent investor now, but he was there to help get kind of things from just two of us sitting in front of a whiteboard trying to figure it out to an actual deployable, web app to test. In those first 6 months, it was, contracting a developer, walking through every screen, going through and seeing like what are the scenarios, and then not overdoing it. I think a lot of first time app developers, either if they're technical, I think what typically happens is they'll come into it with sort of a sense of, well, I'm going to build the best thing and then people will naturally show up. And sometimes there tends to be something that's built that looks really cool and it's really snazzy and everything, but it isn't meeting a customer where they're at, right? If someone's non-technical, sometimes there's a little bit of stage fright, sort of like, should I even be doing this? I don't know anything about, how this is all together. And then that ends up kind of, I think founders that are developing apps for the first time that they're non-technical tend to get into this mindset of also need to, maybe getting paralyzed. So I think like one thing that I did was, and that we did was, let's get the minimum, product that we can possibly put out, and then send this out to people, keep the gate kind of closed, give it to a small amount of people, and spend more time just talking to these users and getting their feedback, implementing little changes, and holding on to as many things like manually. So for example, the app is kind of based around the premise that you kind of want a mutual friend to be making introductions, inviting you to a group. Everyone likes to get invited, right? So in the app, it's a agent called Emma, and Emma says, "Oh, Harry, Carolina, there's a really good trivia group coming together. We want that to be a fully agentic, AI that operates in the background and does all of these tasks." It's getting there. In the very beginning, I was sitting behind an admin console just typing away.
Oh my God, that's so much work.
Because I wanted to know what people were actually using it for.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to do that by engineering a bot that wasn't going to be useful.
Wow. So walk me through. If I'm a user and I'm a local guy in the DMV and I download this app, the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia, and I download this app and I'm going to see a screen, and it's going to be offering me things to do.
Yeah. So first you're going to go in, you're going to say that you're new. And before you get a login to access the app, you're going to fill out a questionnaire. And it doesn't just ask about your hobbies and your interests. It does that. So it asks you to kind of rank like based on a broader category, but also asks you like, how do you show up in a group? How do you feel? How do you engage in a group? What kind of group dynamic do you prefer? And then you get a personality archetype based on that. And then we set your account up and say, hey, Jeff, your account's ready. Here you go. Right. And, I still offer to talk to people because I want to get their feedback on how hey, fire it up. I'll walk you through it. Right. So what we'll typically do is instead of kind of like meetup.com, which you go in and you can just basically search for anything, what we're doing is saying, okay, here are the things that based on your personality archetype, based on, a bunch of other factors here's a 20% of the activities that are going on that if you request to join, you're very likely to have a good time. And then you're likely to come back and et cetera.
And so once you sign up for one of these activities, how many people are going to be joining you? And what are some of the examples of these activities that you could join?
Yeah. So it's typically the whole premise too is built around 3 foundations. So, and the biggest one is small groups. So no less than 3.
Why?
Well, I think it was really early feedback, especially from early users that were all, the only thing out there is Bumble BFF, and I'm not like
looking for a BFF. I just want a friend.
I want to, not even I'm looking for a BFF, but like I'm just uncomfortable swiping and messaging guys one-on-one to like meet up because sometimes there's mixed signals, missed expectations. There's a lot of pressure there, right? If you show up in a group of 3 or maybe up to 6, it's kind of that magic number where I think the real magic number is like 4 or 5.
Okay.
But it gives you enough security where you don't have to be on all the time.
Yeah.
Right. But it's also not too big where you have a role in the group. I'm showing up and I'm supposed to be here, right? I'm not just going to a big networking event.
And I'm just like looking around, not know who to talk to.
Exactly.
Like, you're in a group.
Right.
Sure.
Exactly. So, hey, there's a trivia night. Great. Emma invites everyone, pulls them together, says, hey guys, here's the group. I'm really excited to have y'all. Like, people talk in a group chat to get to know each other. Then when they show up and they sit down at the table we've reserved for them, it's like, hey, how's it going? Great. Okay, cool. And a lot of times over time, we're just setting people up with the same guys that they've indicated that they enjoy.
After they like hang out with someone, do they like say, oh, I enjoyed hanging out with that person? Or like, yeah.
So this is kind of where we also are threading the needle because I also got a lot, I wanted to do some kind of a feedback form, but the guys wanted us to nudge them to like users that they've already hung out with because they like that feeling of continuity.
And it's building deeper relationships.
Exactly. Yeah. But they didn't want to rate people. So we played around with a lot of language where, Emma goes, hey, who would you want to spend more time with in the future? Or how is that group? Did you spend time talking to anyone in particular? And what that does is it lets people say like, doesn't feel like they're judging anybody else, but like positively saying, oh yeah, Mo and I were actually both in the military for 10 years. I talked to him a ton. Great. Okay, great. We tag them as friends. They don't see that, but it's in the system. So then everything that Ed is suggested, Mo is also suggested too. And, they start kind of showing up for each other. Yeah.
And are there any like specific stories of like friendships that you feel like have developed through the app that you go back to?
Yeah. I talked to some kind of early B2C, business to consumer, like mobile app founders when I was doing this early. And all of them warned me is like, well, you got a big problem on your hands because, think about dating apps. As soon as you have a passionate user, they're the highest churn risk, right? That hasn't been the case. The guys that keep going will come back to it again and again and again and again because they don't want to plan anything, and reach out and say that, hey, we should hang out, So it gives this like container to say, okay, great. I'm just going to tap in here and join something. One guy reached out to me and asked me, how many pictures of events, do you have? I said, oh, I got a bunch. He's like, yeah, can you send me, there was one from last March that was the first trivia night I went to. Could you send that to me? Because, I just moved to the area. I just broke up with my girlfriend. And these guys are now like my best friends. And like, I want to frame the photo.
No.
Yeah. So there's a couple of stories like that I really enjoy hearing.
Wow, I love that. And so I was listening to The Daily this weekend, and it's about the death of the swipe and like the fact that
Yeah.
folks don't want to do the like swipe apps as much anymore and are instead trying to gather in person. And so I think
Yeah.
what's so interesting about this is less about the swiping and more like how do we go from online to offline? And that's a big question that a lot of folks, like the tech industry largely is like, let's keep you online because we make money when you're online. And then all these other folks are like, there's a lot of programs now that I'm seeing that are pushing folks offline. And so you're kind of threading that needle of
Yeah.
those two. Can we go back to why this is an issue? Like, why do we need an app to create these groups of friends? Because as a young woman, I don't see that popping up around as many young women. And what's interesting is that the rates of loneliness that we've seen are actually, we thought they were higher for young men, and they were during the COVID time period, but now they've kind of evened back out where like American young men and women are experiencing quite similar rates of loneliness.
Yeah.
But there's this like friendship recession that we're feeling. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot to unpack there, to borrow a term. I think I think first off, I mean, you're right about a friendship recession among women as well. I've seen it in talking to some of my female friends, siblings, all that stuff. And one of the reasons, honestly, the main reason Choros isn't doing that is that's a problem that needs to be solved. I'm not going to be the one to solve it, because if I understood how to do that, I'd have a very successful company. Yeah. But I think, I think in general, what we've gotten so used to, again, I think I just kind of speak in like user feedback sometimes because I just talk to these guys all the time. And one of the things I remember really early on, I was regretting, the app was really buggy. There's always more to do. There's always more money that's going to have to be spent on, engineering costs and all that stuff. And I said, I was meeting a few of them for this was one of the trivia nights I showed up to, and they're like, how's it going? And I said, well, I almost wish I hadn't gone the like build an app and then release it route. I wish I had like just had some listservs and done some, had maybe a centralized like text database and invite people and do group chats. And they were all like, actually, no, like that's, this is, once we have this, you've kind of given us a container to like direct everything. And now we sort of all identify with this, name, and this is kind of where we go to. So I think people do need to, they feel comfortable when they're kind of assigned roles to, either places or institutions or pieces of technology to say, this is the thing that does this for me. This is the thing that does this for me. In the same way, my mother's father was a, World War II vet, 4 kids, demanding job, but he still had time to go down. He would go down to the VFW hall because that was his place where he got to hang out with his old buddies, and it's like, yep, I equate that with that. And there's my container for my friends, So it's really about bringing that back.
And I feel like in this world right now that everything is trying to be as frictionless as possible. Like, technology is trying to smooth everything. But I think at the same time, there's something to be said for the kind of friction that it takes to like schedule hanging out with someone. And I remember when I was younger and my brother was home, my mom would be like, so what are you two doing this weekend? Well, we were in high school and I'd already have all the plans mapped out and whatever. And my brother would be like, one of the people are going to maybe decide something, but we're not sure when or how. And my friend group was very organized. And I think there is a difference in this like much more organization-based mindset of like, how do we execute this? And right now, the 2024 data from the survey on American life, they found that only 26% of men have more than 6 close friendships. And so I think to me, what you're doing is like taking one of those biggest factors of the organization. I'm curious, why is the assistant that's helping schedule this, why is it a woman named Emma
Well, it's a tribute to a real person. So I mentioned when I first moved to New York, I had more female friends than male friends by a long shot. And the first one I met, that was her name, Emma. And we just hit it off like platonically. And I ended up basically being able to build a really robust social circle based on her recommendations. And a lot of it, I think the guy that I ended up developing the early stages of the app with, she introduced the two of us. And I probably would not have really actively sought like a random guy to hang out with had I not sort of gotten some, hey, we're all going hiking this weekend. There's a couple guys I want you to meet. Like, you should come. And that just kind of broke down a few of those, just barriers that would have made me feel awkward or overly vulnerable or all sorts of different things that would have, like you said, friction that would have prevented me from doing that.
And so then how do you, from going on like a hiking trip to a deeper friendship, like how do you see the app, or in real time, how do you see folks transition from just the side to side relationship of we're going on a hike or we're going to the bar to a more face to face relationship?
Yeah, I think it's kind of about meeting the user or member where they're at in terms of what they actually want. Because there are some guys that literally they just don't have anyone to play golf with, so they want to have a couple golf buddies.
Yeah.
And they, there's a guy on the app that does nothing but go to Topgolf once a month, and he's super happy. And I've talked to him before, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's great. Oh, is there anything else you'd want to get out of it?" He's like, "No, I just, my wife doesn't like playing golf or Topgolf, and this is great. I get to go hang out with people and do that." I'm like, awesome, great. And there are others that are looking for that depth. What I've tried to do is try to activate other resources for that. So the first is just the affinity algorithm that we run, that basically when you've indicated that you want to spend more time with somebody, like I mentioned, they just get hyper weighted in what you get invited to. So you're just more likely to see that person and then that person's friends. So, that sort of natural network starts to form. And hopefully, if you've gone to 12 trivia nights with the same group of people, I would hope that you get, express that if you need it. The other thing is like kind of helping facilitate really active users who have that desire to pull forth, sort of some deeper connections. So I've been partnering with a guy that really wants to activate dads to really communicate better with each other and talk about issues that are facing them. So I've really, instead of trying to engineer that myself, I've really just tried to work with him to help him get some of those activities on the books and, help kind of engineer, like help him with that dynamic. So it's kind of about, I think, democratizing that a little bit.
Yeah. No, it's so important to be like thinking about how different groups can use this, build these friendships differently. And I think, speaking of dads, I think one of the things we see when men are entering the later 20s, early 30s is that there's this big change in friendship dynamics, where all of a sudden there's some guys who are becoming dads, some guys who are becoming husbands, and then there's also other guys who are doing none of those. And then that source of forming and maintaining friendships changes very quickly. And there's a great episode on The Daily of where have all my deep male friendships gone? And this guy's talking about how once he got married, he didn't feel like he needed to invest as much in his guy friendships because he was getting a lot of that emotional labor, companionship from his spouse. But then later on realizing that he didn't have those friendships that he so cherished many years later when he actually did need them, when he was going through relationship struggles. And one thing he mentioned is that while he was feeling so lonely, he would listen to podcasts because he thought like, oh, there's a person there. Like, I don't need to talk to my friends. So honestly, that might correlate to why so many young men are listening to really long form podcasts like Joe Rogan, et cetera.
That's interesting. To your first point, I thought that the core highest bell curve of users would be guys around 29, 30. It's ended up being decently older, where I get a lot of guys that are in their late 40s, early 50s. And it's that thing, oh yeah, my kids are grown, and I don't have a lot of those friendships that I used to have, before I had kids, and I'm on the other side of it, and I really would like some connection.
There's a great SNL skit that's about like taking your husband to the dog park, but it's like a man park. Like I think of that all, and I remember like in college, a lot of my female friends, we were talking about like, oh my God, like we wish we could set our dads up as friends, because all of a sudden, like when we left the house, it was a difference of like, oh, I wish they had more male friendships. And like we were worrying a lot more about our dads than like the boys in our life in that way.
I got hooked into watching the Golden Bachelorette with my mother because she was was telling me, you got to watch this because it's kind of about what you're doing. And I was like, how is that? And then I, sat through a couple episodes, and I don't know if you saw it, but the biggest thing that everyone got into it about wasn't whenever somebody got kicked off the show, the guys were really sad because they were like, oh, okay, cool, we're not getting married, that's fine, see you later. But it was like they were so bummed out that they couldn't just be in this house with all these guys, like all their boys, like hang out in the pool, and like they were just crying, like saying goodbye to each other instead.
That's so sweet. That's so and like it shows what happens when you have that emotional depth, like and it feels so rare, so you cherish it so much more. And there's so many ripple effects of that. Like, I know that statistics show that only about a third of folks who study abroad in college are men.
Yeah.
And part of it is because the curve of entry to friendship is so much higher that a lot of men fear studying abroad or leaving their friends back in college because they're not confident that they're going to be able to make friends in that time or come back to their friends. And so friendship feels very fragile. What do you think, from your experiences, makes a strong friendship?
I think that it kind of goes back to my original, what's difficult about being a guy sometimes is that, inability sometimes to get vulnerable when you need to, right? Or get, have just a check-in, right? I think, if there's, and I think every type of relational dynamic between genders is always a double-edged sword. So the upside of having a buddy from high school that you don't talk to for 5 years, but when they're back in town and they give you a call, you catch up and it's not a big deal that you drifted, and it's awesome and it's great to see that person. You don't hold any resentment for falling out of it. But at the same time, neither of you is doing any of the work to stay in touch.
Yeah. Literally.
So I think it's always a double-edged sword. And I think that I'll kind of keep going back to, like, I think really great friendships are formed when you, especially among men, when there's some kind of shared purpose or shared institution or something that they're kind of both a part of, to keep them coming back to that same space, not necessarily for each other, but for the thing, right? I don't know, this may be a tangent, but I promise you it connects. But I think it was University of North Carolina that did this study in the 90s where they asked hundreds of women and hundreds of men basically the same question, a series of questions about how they identify. And the vast majority of women, when they were asked who they are or like what they identify as, all of the answers were relational. I'm a mother. I'm a sister. I'm a wife. I'm a grandmother. I'm a good friend. Right. All the male answers were, I'm an engineer at Microsoft. I'm a Republican. I'm a veteran. It was all just like very institutional and very, I'm part of this thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because any woman you would ask would have answered, if they're probed a little more, they're also part of institutions, right? Men are fathers and friends and, brothers, right? But the first thing that comes to their mind is sometimes guys think like in terms of relationships, like up and then across and then back down to the relationship instead of like right directly.
What do you mean by that?
Up towards the thing that they're jointly a part of and then across and then back to the association.
Okay.
Right. So we associate because we're both part of this thing. Right. And so I think if I think about a lot of my closest friends, it's because we are a part of the same thing, or we were a part of the same thing for long enough to just have developed this kind of shared, history and bond.
Wow. That's fascinating. That study's fascinating because it is and then as we continue to enter crisis after crisis, like what actually will save us in these crises are not necessarily just our jobs, but our bonds with others. Social capital is actually far more substantial in some ways. And oftentimes women are the ones carrying that social capital for a partnership or for a friendship or whatever it may be. So you are working to help build friendships between guys. But you also talked about how at the beginning, like you were part of a lot of female friend groups. What do you think is the value of having both those like co-gender friend groups? And then also like how do men who maybe only have male friends broach into that space too?
Yeah, I think sometimes it is kind of a function of environment and dynamic and everything. I'll say, I don't know necessarily why, but when I was living in New York, I had mostly female friends. Ever since I moved back here, I talk to my sister and my fiance, and then most of my friends are guys. I think that there is a utility, really strong utility for just a healthy spaces for men to connect with each other exclusively. Because just you are able to talk about stuff that you sometimes can't talk about in mixed company, and not in any kind of I'm not
not like
saying
locker room talk.
Just things where you might just not be as
women feel the same about some spaces.
Exactly. It's just, oh man, I'm I've just been a little bit depressed, and that's just kind of something that maybe we should feel more comfortable in mixed company just saying that. But
I think what's interesting is if I was in a group of a mixed group of folks and someone said that, I would automatically be thinking about how do we fix this? How do we help this? How do we? And I feel correct me if I'm wrong, I feel if it was a group of guys, and someone said that, it would be oh man, that sucks. It's not how do we fix it? And sometimes things don't need to be fixed.
Sometimes they don't need to be. Exactly. I think sometimes if I'm having a bad time or going through something, and I get my buddies together, sometimes we'll just get together and, we don't address any elephants in any rooms. It's just, oh man, that was great, guys. I really just needed to sit around and talk about Steely Dan with you. And that was awesome. And I feel a lot better,
But then on the opposite side, I think for example, I recently went and visited my boyfriend and was talking to one of his guy friends that I'd never met before, but that he's spent the last 4 months seeing almost every day.
Yeah.
And then I was so do you know much about his girlfriend or stuff like that? He's no, I don't ask him that much about that. And so literally first night there, I'm getting deep with this guy, finding out all these things. And he's wow, I'm learning so much about him through you. And I'm you guys have been together 4 months, not in a judgment way, but it's so interesting because in my brain, I'm what else would you talk about for 4 months? Let's get into the nitty gritty, the difficult conversations. Touchy subjects. And I think that there is this difference of how do you maintain those friendships and also what level of depth to get to?
Well, sometimes it's a different kind of depth, right? What you just said reminds me of a story that conversation I had recently as well along those very same lines. I made a friend in the area about 5 years ago, and he was living in my neighborhood, so we ended up just going on runs together all the time, talking. We once a week runs, and then 3 or 4 beers afterwards, neutralize the positive effects of the run, obviously, right? But he started dating someone, and the 3 of us went on a hike together. But she had brought up a sibling or a sister, and I was oh, I didn't know you had a sister. And the new girlfriend goes, how long have you guys been friends? 5 years. And I was hey, I can tell you, everything. I can tell you exactly why he thinks that the Byzantine Empire fell, because we have talked about that for hours. But no, I can't tell you how many brothers and sisters he has.
Well, that's so interesting because this is a very similar thing where I'm always when I check in on my female friends or even my guy friends, I'm how's your mom doing? How's your dad doing? How are your siblings doing? I'm very much back to that relational identity. I view them as a child, a sibling, a partner, whatever it may be. And so every check-in, I'm asking how their family members are doing.
Yeah.
And I know that's something that's very different of it doesn't need to go to that depth sometimes in male friendships, but it also leads to a lack of some of that vulnerability. Some shit might be really going on in someone's family. And
absolutely.
You don't know that. And so it is how do we find that balance of entering more depth into our friendships and also respecting the it doesn't need to go deep every time.
I feel we could swap anecdotes on this all day because I'm thinking about a non-fight that I had with my fiance a few days ago where I went to a Choros book club. There's a guy that wanted to set up a book club. It's a great idea where it was, we're not all reading the same book, but just bring the book you're reading and we can just talk about it, right?
Oh,
it's
nice.
Cool. It's a busy guys book club, right?
Yeah, love it.
But she was how was book club? And, how is everyone at the book club? And I said, yeah, pretty good. She's like, that's
Did
it.
you guys talk about the books the whole time?
Yeah, we talked about the books the whole time.
That's wild.
And yeah, and she's like, well, how is everybody? And I was like, oh, good. Well, yeah, I met this new guy. Oh, cool. What's he like? And immediately I was like, okay, well, he's actually a research librarian at the Library of Congress, and he's doing this really cool thing about declassifying stuff at the Department of Defense from the 90s. And I'm getting super excited.
Yeah.
And she's like, okay, okay, I'm listening to you, but you're really excited about like this,
what he's doing.
What is he doing and the cool things that he's doing instead of
fair.
how he's doing,
Fascinating.
right?
I want to meet this guy.
Yeah.
I feel like at a book club, at least the ones I've been to, it's more like, let's like talk about how we're doing, share food, and then like maybe a little bit talk about the book.
Yeah.
But it is important to have these spaces that like are a sense of purpose, like, oh, we're going to have book club. Yeah. And then it gathers people. And like I've been hosting trivia nights at my house monthly, and like seeing the way that it like gets like 15 people regularly every single time, and people just want friendship. But if I was like, hey, let's all gather for dinner, like I don't think as many people would come. Yeah. Whereas like we're coming for trivia, and then bring a dish and we'll share it. And like low lift. Mm-hmm. And then people do come and do participate. And it is interesting to see those friendships forming. But yeah, curious to see if there's a future where Choros is broaching into like having mixed gender friendships as part of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great idea. I used to joke around about like, oh yeah, we could set up another app and then it'll be like the camp across the lake and do
So one more question I have before we get to the end is we're in this era of AI infiltrating everything. And we also have a greater dependency on AI as a source of emotional support too. Yeah. And so how do we see being able to combat the overtaking of AI of our social lives with other mannerisms to connect in person and going offline?
Yeah, that actually has a lot to do with how we've kind of structured how our group formation algorithm operates and how Emma operates to negotiate a lot of these introductions. When really early on, we were just messing around with basically trying to structure a more universal chatbot that a user could inquire about almost anything, and you would be softly redirected to activities, right? But we actually decided to change course. And, like I said, for a while, I was just typing away a couple months just to learn like key stories and key instances that when do people use it the most? What are the motions and the agents that will actually affect people getting together? So Emma really is like 15 different agents that take charge when there's specific recognition happening. Oh. And if anything else happens in the chat, it usually just gets pinged to me or somebody else on the team. That's just like so-and-so asked this, and then someone comes in and just like does it, right? And because we want to keep it like guiding towards, really purposeful in-person connection. Yeah. The thing, I worry about getting overly dependent on AI all the time. It's too frictionless. And with real people,
they'll respond to you all the time. They'll tell you exactly what you want, and they'll treat you like a king all the time. It's like, I think what's something that's so special about friendships and relationships is how tough it is. Yep. Like two human beings or multiple human beings trying to enjoy each other's company. And like, that's the beauty. That's what's exciting about it. Yeah. It's not clear where it's going to go.
It's not clear. It's infinitely complex. And, you can make it as convenient as possible and remove as many of the externalities to ensure that people get in the same room. But then there's always going to be a percentage of, risk, vulnerability, friction that's just par for the course when it comes to building and sustaining community.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sometimes in the like portions of your life where people are like falling out of it or coming into it, or you're waiting for someone to respond. You're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize how much this person means to me because of that friction that gets added in. And so like, it's what teaches us to be human again in this very chaotic world that's trying to make us as least human as possible. To close out this episode, I want to end with the question that I ask every time, which is what, Alex, is one of the things you love about being a man?
Yeah. in a lot of ways, I think it's like I mentioned the double-edged sword thing, because there's a positive aspect of that, the lack of the "are you okay" dynamic sometimes. And that is I think just a real tolerance and just societal acceptance of like, yeah, he's going to be all right. He's doing his own thing. And that's also, the thing I like about it is that gives me a sense of just risk tolerance and agency that I've been able to take advantage of. I think back, most things I've done in my life have kind of been higher risk efforts. I used to have a music career where I just put bands on tour and stuff like that. And half of that was, I think if I wasn't a guy, like the idea of just, okay, cool, I'm just going to cold call a bunch of venues, negotiate a guarantee, do a ticket sales thing, and then I'll just get a van and I'll hop in a car with 4 or 5 strangers. And I think we might stay at this Super 8 motel, but we'll see if anyone wants to offer us a room, and it's just, you can kind of just being able to kind of navigate the world without having to think about some of the other risks that I think might be inherent if I wasn't a guy.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me on the Masking Tapes. Thank you, everyone who is listening. Thank you to Open Gov Hub for the space and Root for Good for the sponsorship. And I am just so grateful to be continuing these conversations.
Thanks, Carolina. I appreciate you having me.